It's time for Unit 6, Lecture 2 on evolution, and I will do my best to not talk your ear off during this one, as this is a topic that is near and dear to me. And I know if you're in my classes, you've heard me talk about it for 75 minutes in kind of a weird way already, just to get the point across that evolution is a change over some period of time. And the big thing is that individuals and I totally butchered that, but whatever, cannot evolve. Populations do. So we're not talking about that organism level of the ecosystem. We're talking about the population level. So let's start off. And some of this is review stuff, and you'll hear more next year. And depending on which bio teacher you get, some hear more than others. All right. So evolution by natural selection. All right, you've heard of natural selection, survival of the fittest, all that fun stuff. It all brings images to you. All right, and all of this is thanks to the man Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin was the guy who came up with this whole idea, discovered it, or determined it, or whatever you want to call it, in the 1830s and early 1840s. After he made a big trip on a ship called the Beagle, he went to South America, sailed from England, across the Atlantic, South America, sailed around South America, and noticed a bunch of really interesting stuff that he then pieced together to come up with his theory of evolution and natural selection. And I'm just going to be doing a very basic flyby of evolution here. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on it. There are whole courses and entire college majors devoted to the subject. All right, it is one of the fundamental blocks that most of biology is built on. So you'll hear a lot more about it next year than this year. So what Darwin did is he looked at populations. All right, all about populations of organisms, and saw that the individuals in that population slightly differed in form or function or behavior. All right? You need look no further than your class. Either your 8th grade class or your 9th grade class. If you look at all of the boys here at McQuaid in your grade level, some of you look different. You act different. You function different. You're all part of the same population. All right, you're a and we can branch out more than just McQuaid, because we're not interbreeding with each other here at McQuaid. There are biological reasons that prevent that. But if you look at even just 9th graders in Rochester, or the Rochester area, Rochester and the suburbs, all right, you guys are different. How you look, how you act, how you behave, how you function. All right, and some of these differences, not all of them, upbringing has something to do with it, but some of the differences are hereditary. You might hear one family member say, "Wow, you really have your grandfather's eyes," or "Man, you have hair just like your mother." Something like that. That's all hereditary. And what Darwin did is he said that the environment exerts strong influences, or, plays favorites with some of the individuals based on their traits. And whichever individuals survive to produce offspring, those individuals pass on more of their traits. And that is evolution by natural selection. All right? So certain individuals are more likely to survive. The ones that survive are more likely to reproduce. Natural selection is that process. It's a process by which individuals have favorable variations, favorable traits. They're different. And the traits are better adapted to their environment. All right? The traits are already there. Adaptations are present in an individual and it's governed by their traits. All right, they are not learned by an individual during a lifetime. So individuals that have favorable adaptations to their environment survive and reproduce more successfully than others. Now, can something that's not as well adapted reproduce? Yes, it can. Just has less of a chance of surviving to reproduce than the individuals that have the better traits for that environment. And what Darwin said is that as we go through many generations, each generation is one group of offspring, all right, natural selection causes the characteristics of a population to change. All right, so the individuals that have traits better suited to a particular environment leave more offspring, which have those good traits. And so as that keeps happening, more and more of the good traits show up in the population until everybody has the good traits, and then some individuals even have slightly better versions of those good traits, and that's how evolution happens. That's how this change over time occurs. So evolution itself, in this context, it's a change in the characteristics of a population from one generation to the next. The big thing is population. All right? No, my grandfather was not a monkey, and neither was yours. All right? It doesn't work like that. All right? It wasn't just like a monkey was decided, hey, I'm going to be smart and be a human, and snapped his opposable thumb and forefinger, and boom, became a human. It didn't happen like that. It was a gradual change in population dynamics and genetics over time. All right? So how this works is there's pretty much 4 steps. All right? 4 things that describe natural selection. 1, individuals vary. All right? There are differences in the traits of the individuals in the population. That's where the individual part comes in. All right? Take a look at myself and Mr. Galambos, if you know who Mr. Galambos is. He's a good 3-4 inches taller than me. All right? Well, if there's a change in the population that favors somebody taller, well, the taller people will do better. If there's a change in the population that favors somebody who's shorter, the shorter people will do better. But anyway, there's change in population. Some of them are genetic and inherited. All right, they're genetic, they're inherited. Also, more individuals are produced than live to grow up and reproduce. All right, if you let any population just kind of produce at their heart's desire, more offspring will be produced than the environment can support. We're kind of doing that here right now. Of course, we're here in the on Earth. We're not at the point yet. I think we're getting to it. How long it's going to be, I don't know. But you see things like wars and famine show up more and more and more. And part of that is we're warring over resources because we don't have enough of these resources to make everybody on the Earth happy. And the individuals with some genes are more likely to survive and reproduce than individuals with other genes. So the big thing is over time, the population includes a greater proportion of individuals with a beneficial trait. All right, and as enough of these changes happen, it eventually drives the population from one generation to the next, and we get new traits in the population. All right, so if we take a look at a population of deer, let's stop using humans. I use humans all the time because I'm a human, and I think in terms of humans. But if we have deer that become isolated in a cold area, I don't know, they're in a little valley eating, and all of a sudden there's a rock slide and they can't get out of the valley. So some of the deer probably have slightly thicker, warmer fur. All right? Not by a lot, but a little bit. And then these deer would be more likely to survive the cold area because their fur is a little warmer and a little thicker. And as they survive, they pass on their genes for thick fur, and those young individuals with the thick fur have a better chance to reproduce. And this thick fur is called the adaptation. Now, I'm sure every single one of the deer wants itself and its children to have the thick fur, but they can't. They get what their genes have them. Alright, so an adaptation is any anatomical, physiological, or behavioral change that improves a population's ability to survive. When we talk about adaptations, we can say which individuals have them and which do not. But individuals cannot obtain new ones throughout their life. You get what you get. You don't throw a fit. That's how genetics works. Alright? And so these populations have the adaptations, and new adaptations can arrive in a population. And we look at it, again, in terms of populations, not individuals. So here's our deer that get isolated right here, alright? We got our deer. Alright, we got some deer right here with the thicker, warmer coat. It's the darker brown color than the lighter brown. So they get separated from the group. They get stranded in the cold mountain. And the ones with the thicker coat have a better chance of surviving. So they live. The ones with the thinner coat, some of them die off. And with every year and every mating period, more and more of the thick, dark fur becomes popular in the crowd. Well, it's not because it's now fashionable. It's because more of those genes were passed on. All right, and you get a higher percentage of those genes, and boom, that is evolution. Sometimes two species that are closely connected in their interactions evolve together, and that's called coevolution. All right, we'll talk about the Hawaiian honeycreeper. It's an insect. All right, it has a long curved beak. Actually, it's a flower. That's not a flower. The Hawaiian honeycreeper is a bird that eats nectar at a certain flower. There. It has a curved beak that is long to reach the nectar at the base of the flower. Now, that flower itself, the populations of flowers, have two adaptations. First is the nectar to attract the birds to it. The second is the structure that forces the pollen onto the bird's head when they go in to drink the nectar. Only the honeycreeper can pollinate these flowers. Other birds don't have the right kind of beak to get at the nectar. Alright, so the plant makes the nectar to attract the birds. The birds come to drink the nectar because it's yummy and tasty and it helps them live. And while that's happening, they get pollen on their face, which they take to the next flower. So that is two organisms that are not related, kind of working together, and over time developed a very specific interaction that can only happen between those two. If something happens to that flower, the honeycreepers are in trouble. If something happens to the honeycreeper, those flowers are in trouble. That is coevolution. Now there's another type of evolution that's become prevalent lately, and that's evolution of artificial selection. Artificial selection is exactly what it sounds like. It's not natural. It's not nature selecting. Selective breeding, specifically by humans, is a type of artificial selection. Dogs have been bred for certain characteristics. Look at all the different breeds of dogs. Guess what? Every breed of dogs, same species. That's why they're called different breeds and not different species of dogs. Any dog can mate with any other dog and produce a baby dog that will then be able to mate and produce other baby dogs. Craziness, right? So, we've also done the same for fruits, grains, vegetables, cows, all this stuff. We've selected the traits we want. Sometimes we want the largest seeds, sometimes we want the sweetest fruits, and we select what we want the offspring to be like. And we breed them in that way. And so we get certain varieties of fruit. Look at all the different types of apples out there. Well, we've bred them for the traits they have. That is artificial selection. That is us choosing the traits that get to breed. Natural selection is the environment, and nature chooses the traits that get to breed. One of the negatives of artificial selection is resistance. We do artificial selection without wanting to. All right, and resistance is ability to, kind of survive a chemical or disease. All right, so some organisms might be naturally resistant to something. All right, let's think of hand sanitizer, where we use it to kill bacteria. It kills 99.99% of bacteria, which means it does not kill 0.01% of bacteria, which is, 1 out of every 10,000 bacteria live. Well, that bacteria is resistant to the hand sanitizer. So, over time, we're killing all the bacteria that are not resistant to the hand sanitizer and leaving the ones that are, which are then going to breed and make more of the bacteria that are resistant to the hand sanitizer. And we have to come up with new ways to make the hand sanitizer in order to kill off these ones that were resistant. We're doing this with drugs and antibiotics. If you've heard of MRSA, MRSA is an antibiotic-resistant strain of bacteria that naturally lives on our skin. But if you get infected with the antibiotic-resistant kind, we have trouble killing it, and it can cause huge damages or huge problems for people. All right, so we promote the evolution of resistant populations by trying to control the pests and bacteria with chemicals. All right, and sometimes, like, antibiotics are a great thing. They save more lives than they kill through antibiotic-resistant bacteria, but that's going to become a bigger and bigger and larger problem as time goes on. Another example of resistance is pesticide resistance. All right. So if we're spraying corn with a pesticide to kill grasshoppers, some of the grasshoppers will live, passing on their traits to be resistant to that pesticide. All right, same type of thing as the antibiotic example I went on with here. You got a nice little picture. So we have insect pests are sprayed with an insecticide, kills most of them, but these two. Well, now these two can breed, and ones that were not on the piece of corn what was sprayed, they breed. So you get another population, and there's more of the resistant ones. So then we go on and we spray and we kill the non-resistant ones, yada, yada, yada. There they are, all dead. But now there were more of the resistant ones that can now breed, and now we have more of the resistant ones, and that trait is becoming more and more prevalent in the population. That is artificial selection, and that is unwanted artificial selection. We don't want bugs that are going to eat our corn before we get to. We're growing the corn to eat. We don't want the bugs to eat it. That's why we're trying to kill them. And that is kind of a negative effect of this whole idea of artificial selection. And that is evolution happening before our eyes. It's not natural evolution. It's the artificial selection form of evolution, but it's still a change in the genetic population or the genetic makeup of a population over time, which by definition is evolution. So I've tried to keep this one kind of short as I could. Believe me, I could have gone on rambling probably for another 45 minutes if I really wanted to. But I'm not going to. I'm going to end it. If you have questions, bring them in. Feel free to answer them. And have a good night.